Dave Smith tried to blame Israel for the war, but Dennis Prager calmly explained what every honest person already knows. Every innocent death is Hamas's fault. Watch what happens when facts meet fantasy.
Is that it over there? Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. The dilemma in the Middle East has always been the same from the beginning of Israel's creation in 1948, and that is that its neighbors do not want there to be a Jewish state in their midst. That is the entire problem. One side, as I have put it all of my life, one side wants the other side dead. And in case you were in doubt about it, October 7th should have made that clear. If you really want to have a serious moral debate, and one should, and you're not already committed to the anti-Israel side, I have a question. And I think this question more or less clarifies everything. If Israel announced, we are disarming and we will fight no longer, what would happen? If the Palestinians said, we are disarming and we will fight no longer, what would happen?
This is a brilliant question. This is part of the great clarity of Dennis Prager. It may very well be that some people can't honestly answer this question, but anyone who is only half objective will be able to know, or to acknowledge, that if Israel were to put down their arms, they would just take all of their arms and move it out of the country. What would happen? They would be swarmed by multiple nations, murdering every single Jew. And if Hamas, the nations around Israel, their enemies, would put down their arms, what would happen? There would be peace. If you don't know this, you're in delusion. You're just not in reality. And if you're half objective, you know this to be true. And that explains everything about what's going on and whose fault everything is.
If you are intellectually honest, you know the answer to the question. The day after Israel announced it disarmed, you would have an October 7th of the entire population of Israel. There would be finally an actual genocide, not the false accusation of Israeli genocide in Gaza. If the Palestinians announced that, the next day, or perhaps the next week, there would be peace. This is the only time, as the little excerpt I saw when I spoke at Oxford and debated this issue, this is the only case in modern history where people believe the democracy, the free state, the state with an opposition press, an opposition party, civil rights for all its citizens, including its 2 million Arab citizens, the peace-loving state, the democracy, is the aggressor, and the police state that tortures its opponents, they're the good guys. That is how inverted it is. I have a theory as to why everything is inverted, and I believe it is because it is the one Jewish state in the world. There are 22 Arab states. There are 52 Muslim states. There are 200 states around about that number all over the world. Only one is targeted for extinction. There is no other state targeted for extinction, only the one Jewish state the size of New Jersey. And so that is the issue. One side wants the other side dead, and it has been true since 1948.
And this is why we continue to say this is pure, blatant Jew hatred, anti-Semitism that existed throughout time. That's purely what it is.
All right, Dennis, thank you very much. Cenk, why don't we go to you, founder of the Young Turks? Go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, we should clarify the question, because if we're saying, hey, was Israel right to go in the first place after October 7th? I say yes, but it depends on how. And how long do you stay? How do you conduct affairs, et cetera? If we're talking about how Israel has conducted this war and whether they should still be in there, that's a hard no. It's not even close. It's been absolutely atrocious what they've done. And not only has it killed over 33,000 Palestinians, with probably a lot more than that inside the rubble, 76,000 wounded, 1.1 million people starving. If you think that that is good for Israel, I think that you ought to have a sanity check. So not only is it devastating for the Palestinians, potentially devastating for the world, as Netanyahu now agitates for a broader war with Iran engulfing the entire Middle East, which will be catastrophic for America and the world. But for Israel itself, if you want a safe haven for Jews, you must stop the occupation. 75 long, brutal years. So it's one thing to say, hey, theoretically, Hamas would do this. And by the way, I'm then going to say all Palestinians would do that, or all Muslims would do that. That's a dangerous area to go to, right? It's another thing to say, yes, well, while they theoretically don't want our state to exist, we are actually preventing their state from existing. I mean, it's such an ironic argument. Hey, we prevented their state for 75 long years. We prevented them from having freedom for 75 long years. We brutalized them in every possible way. We've humiliated them in every possible way. Number one, we can't believe they're fighting back. Are you serious? We'll talk a lot about this in the debate. But so would people have been surprised if Jews fought back against the Germans during World War II? Would that have been terrorism? Is that what it would have been? That's outrageous to say that. Of course, Jews should have been able to fight back against the Germans. Any occupied people should be able to fight back. We can go to Armenians fighting back against the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so those are my original people. I'm Turkish descent. And if you said, oh, the Armenians, how dare they? They should have loved the Turks. And they should have said the Turks are the greatest people on earth. And they should have been occupied and accepted their occupation. I can't believe they fought back. And you know what? When the Turks moved them and killed them, they were just defending themselves. They have a right to defend themselves. Guys, if you're in that camp, I don't think you understand how biased you sound and how it does not sound to anyone outside of your camp that you're in a rational world. So if you want Israel to be safe, you must end the occupation. It is not optional. So is the goal here to say, as Netanyahu is clearly saying now, he's saying, I do not want a two-state solution. Permanent occupation means permanent war, permanent terrorism, and a disaster for Israel, let alone the Palestinians.
Got it.
This guy's very passionate, Cenk, but let me just make 2 points about what he just said. Number one, a million people are starving. So this conversation was a little while back. There hasn't been a single Palestinian that died from starvation. There is no one starving. There was never anyone starving. And I bring this out to demonstrate that they continue to repeat propaganda and lies, which are completely fabricated. There was never starvation going on during this entire war. They're pleasantly plump, very well fed. Point number one. Point number two is the notion that the occupation is the problem is another blatant lie. And when people are uninformed, they buy into it. A complete blatant lie. It's a lie because there are 2 points. One is going back in history to understand that Israel never occupied anything, that actually the Arabs started a war, and in the war, in Israel is defending themselves, they took over certain land. That's not occupation. That's point number one. That was a defensive wars that Israel fought. Number two is that Israel offered back up to 97% of what they call the occupied territories. And you know what the Arabs said? You know what the PA, the Palestinian Authority, said? No, we're not taking that. Why not? Exactly because of what Dennis Prager said in the opening. They don't want to resolve occupation, what they call occupation. They want the Jewish people out of Israel.
Batya, why don't you go ahead? Batya Ungar-Sargon, she is opinion editor at Newsweek, and she's the author of Second Class, How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women, which we have a copy of on the desk right over there. She was so kind to give us one. Go ahead, Batya. You can go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here with this panel. Are we all in agreement that Israel was just to invade after October 7th? Cenk, you agreed with that. Dennis, you obviously agreed with that. I agree with that. Dave, are you in agreement that that was a just?
I would say, like Cenk, it depends on what you mean by
what
invade.
followed.
Sure.
But the initial invasion itself, you could see that from a just point, that that would have been justified based on October 7th, based on had they conducted themselves. There was a way that Israel could have conducted itself that you would have felt comfortable with that as a reaction to October 7th. Is that accurate?
Well, I mean, look, if you're spending your opening asking me a question, it's a fairly complex question, but I would certainly say that Israel was more than justified in pursuing and killing anybody who was involved in October 7th.
Why don't we cut the questions there? Continue with your opening statement. We'll get to
Well,
that.
I think that's very important because then we can narrow the scope of the debate. It doesn't have to be about whether the war is just, but whether Israel's behavior since invading was just and the way that it has carried it out. And I think the answer to that is very clearly yes, because first of all, the measures that Israel has taken, obviously, we look at the destruction and it is horrifying. We see these children, we see women, we see people being impacted in the most horrific way. And it looks horrible. But the reality is that war is horrible. And the thing that we have to determine is Israel engaged in a war or in war crimes? Right? Is Israel engaged in a justified response to a heinous attack? Or is it going and doing things that are beyond the pale? And the evidence seems to suggest that Israel is not only behaving in a way that every other army has behaved in a very similar situation, but in a much more careful way, despite the massive destruction. And the evidence for that is in the efforts that they have made, the millions and millions of phone calls they make. You understand that Israel telegraphs to the enemy before every single thing that it does in Gaza. They're literally giving away the plan in order to get civilians out of harm's way. Now, can more be done? More can always be done. But have they gone further than any army in human history? The answer is yes. The number 33,000. Last week, Hamas put out a statement on Telegram in which they said they cannot account for 11,000 of those. So Hamas itself reduced the number to 22,000, which means that if you take the number of Hamas soldiers who have been killed, right? Israel says 13,000. Hamas itself in February admitted to 6,000. We're talking about a ratio of combatants to non-combatants that, again, simply has not been seen in urban warfare. All of these things, I think, come together to suggest that despite the enormous devastation, and I'm with you on that emotionally, we have to analyze this objectively and conclude that if you are saying 33,000 as the number of dead, you are mourning the butchers. And I think that's shameful. I think it's really important that people who are mourning the civilians make sure that they are careful, that they are not mourning exactly what we all have agreed on, which is that the butchers, Israel had every right, not just every right, but a moral right and a moral obligation to kill them.
Got it. Thank you, Bacha. Dave, you can go ahead. Comedian, and he's host of the Part of the Problem podcast. Go ahead, Dave.
Sure. Well, since we have a short opening here, I think I'll just respond to a couple things that I've heard you guys say so far. So one of the things that I notice almost in every war is that it kind of drives people down to this most base collectivist understanding of what's going on here. You know, this side is bad, this side is good, and no one really sees the nuance that there are individuals involved. So, for example, in the war between Ukraine and Russia, you see people who have the Ukrainian flag in their Twitter bio, and they celebrate when there's a Russian defeat, never really considering the fact that many of these Russian young boys were conscripted into this army and that they're victims too. And, you know, when Mr. Prager says one side wants peace and the other side wants to kill all of these people, it's a very convenient collectivist way to look at things. But the reality, the objective reality of the situation here is that there have been atrocities on both sides committed against the other side. This is true throughout the history of the existence of Israel. This is true before the existence of the state of Israel, when with the Zionist settlers, the British, the Arabs. There were atrocities committed on all sides. And to say that everybody, as if, or to imply that everybody on the Israeli side just wants peace and everybody on the Palestinian side just wants, that is just not true. There are lots of Palestinians who just want peace, and there are lots of Israelis who want their land and are quite willing and will openly, explicitly say they're willing to do whatever it takes to take their land. Now, to your point about how, I mean, you said every single strike they're warned. No, that is just not true. That's objectively not true. They do warn sometimes, but then that also leads to the question of, does that mean that whatever you do is just okay? The reality is that this is not just a war like any other war. And that doesn't mean other wars are justified necessarily, but there's a very big difference in this war compared to almost any other war we could think of. And the major difference that I see is that Israel has dominated the Palestinian people since at least 1967, and we could probably go back before that. Let me just say this. if we look at things in not a collectivist way, and we recognize that there are individuals, and these individuals make up different groups. Let's say we have the group that is Hamas, made up of individuals, but that's Hamas. Within that group, we have the militant Hamas, and we have the political arm of Hamas. They are different. We also have Israel, which is made up of its citizens. We have different political parties within Israel. Okay, let's take this one group for a second, the innocent Palestinians. I hope both of you would concede that such a group does exist. There are some people on the pro-Israel side who will explicitly tell you that that group does not exist. I think if we're being honest with ourselves, there is no group that has been more victimized than the innocent Palestinians. And at a certain point, maybe we ought to think about that group. Nobody has been through it worse than that group, the innocent Palestinians. And at a certain point, I think the question needs to be asked, does Israel have a right to do what it's been doing to the innocent Palestinians for many, many decades now?
Thank you guys very much. You all stayed within the time limit, which is actually incredible. And Bacha, you did steal a little bit of my thunder because, and I'm big glad that you answered that question. Dave and Cenk both responded in that way about how exactly what the question and the superimposed upon that is that do we agree that Israel at least either had a right or was justified in taking some action as a result of October 7th. So my question, I think, to both of you, and both of you can feel free to chime in after both of them has responded, is if we look at the original statements for the war and for the invasion, is that the Israeli military was supposed to accomplish a few objectives. Number one, they had to destroy Hamas, the militant terrorist organization. Two, they had to lead to the release of the hostages. And three, they had to make sure that an October 7th could never happen again. So in the conduct of the war so far, do you believe that they have been successful with those objectives? Dennis, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Oh, you're going to want to listen to this.
None of us knows yet. Israel is being prevented by much of the world. And I feel that on this entire issue, I'm living in a make-believe world. Every analogy could have been applied to Nazi Germany. There were innocent Germans who were killed by the Allies in the bombing and in invasions and so on. No one denies that. But to point out that there were innocent Germans while the Nazis were in charge is a morally idiotic point. It means nothing. It only means that every innocent German's life that was taken is the responsibility of the Nazis. Every innocent Palestinian life that has been taken is the responsibility of Hamas or Hezbollah. That's it. The analogy is perfect. There is one difference between Hamas and the Nazis. And I never called any group in my 40 years of radio Nazi. I never called an individual that other than the Nazis of the 1940s. But there is only one difference between Hamas and the real Nazis of Germany. The Germans hid their atrocities. Hamas boasts and videos them.
Bacha, go ahead.
I think that they have, I would say, destroying Hamas, definitely. They're not going to get every single one, but the idea that Yahya Sinwar will ever breathe open air again seems to me very far-fetched. I think they have driven him underground forever. And, you know, they've cut off the head. And the idea that Hamas will be able to regroup at this point seems to me very unlikely. The release of the hostages, no, they failed on that front. I think they tried, maybe they could have tried harder. I think, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I think a lot of them are dead. So let's say about that, but I think on that they've obviously failed. And as to another October 7th, I think a lot of that has to do with what we're seeing now in terms of the realignment happening in the Middle East, to where you see Saudi Arabia clinging to the idea that they too will be able to join the Abraham Accords at some point. The moderate Sunni and Gulf states rushed to Israel's defense, amazingly, to protect them from these Iranian rockets. And to me, that is, you know, I mean, I don't think this is a moral question so much as a strategic one. And I'm sure we're going to get into where does the United States fit into all this? Where do we want the United States to fit into all this? But from that point of view, and Iran-backed October 7th, should it happen again, is going to happen in a very different Middle East, one in which Israel has a lot of support from the Arab nations, and that makes it less likely as well, I believe.
Yeah,
I'm just kind of I'm blown away by the statement that Mr. Prager just made, that the only difference he can see between the Nazis and Hamas is that the Nazis hid their atrocities. So if that's the only difference you can see, I have a few others that pop to mind. The Nazis were a government. The Nazis had an army. The Nazis had an air force. The Nazis had submarines. The Nazis controlled from France to Poland in all of Europe, whereas Hamas can't even control Gaza effectively. I mean, I find the statement that you can't see any differences between the Nazis killed.
Do you see a moral difference?
Well, okay, but hold on. But that wasn't what you said. What you said is that you can't see a difference. The Nazis, okay, but yes, I see a moral difference. The Nazis killed over 10 million people outside of the war conflict, just in terms of people that they killed, let alone the tens of millions of people who you might hold them responsible for. So yes, I do see a moral difference between the two. I'm not saying October 7th was horrifically immoral, but if you're going to say, do you see a moral difference, that would be like if somebody had murdered two people and you went, I see no difference between that and the Nazis. Okay, yes, they're both immoral, but there's enormous differences between the two. Now, to the other point of the idea of, can Israel eliminate Hamas, even if they were, which I don't think is feasibly possible, that they eliminated everybody who is a member of Hamas. I mean, in order to do...
Let me just jump back for 1 second to say this whole argument about the only difference between Hamas and the Nazis is just an irrelevant argument. Dennis Prager is trying to bring out just one simple point, and that is the moral depravity of Hamas in comparison to the Nazis.
Do this, you would have to look at, if the images of Gaza City aren't enough, you would have to look at images 5 times over of that, and this is going to result in just slaughtering innocent people, not to mention the excess mortality where hundreds of thousands of people are going to die as a result of this in the future. But even then, you would just be dealing with another Hamas-like group. Because if you don't understand what creates this problem to begin with, look, this is the problem. This happens all throughout history, all throughout the world. There's a reason why the Nazis only rose. First, it was after we imposed Versailles. But then, as you know, it was after the Great Depression, when there was hyperinflation, when things go terrible. That's when the worst, most violent extremist groups rise. Dennis, and that's what the future is going to be, unfortunately.
I have to say is, what's fascinating is that before these two guys spoke about how victimized the Palestinians are, if you just listen to what he said, he believes in victimization. He deliberately believes in victimization, because Dave Smith is saying that, the reason why the Nazis rose to power is because the West did this, the West did that. That's the other thing. Justifying the horrors that the Nazis have done because they are victims, and that's why they came to power. Hamas are victims. So you can go and murder people, innocent civilians, over 1,000 of them, in the most brutal way possible, because you've been victimized. That promotes victimization.
Just very briefly
sure,
to that.
And Dennis can go.
Something really staggering has happened in Gaza since October 7th, which is there have been protests against Hamas for the first time there were protests actually recently in 2019, but they were quashed by Hamas in a very aggressive, violent way. But the people of Gaza, the innocent people of Gaza, yes, who you mentioned, are speaking out against Hamas because Hamas is stealing their food and their aid, and they are seeing, they've known all along the role Hamas plays in their oppression. But the fact that Hamas has lost support in Gaza since October 7th, while gaining support massively in the West Bank, right? Which speaks to how different the Palestinian populations are in the different areas. I just don't buy it that Israel is creating more and more Hamases and Hamases and Hamases. I think that there's evidence that actually the opposite is happening, that the people of Gaza are seeing we have to get out of this cycle.
Go ahead, Dennis.
That's insane, by the way.
We'll get to. I'll come to that.
I hate to put it this way, but I mean it sincerely, so I will. You are on record now, because the internet has a permanent memory.
I'm aware.
Of saying that there's no comparison morally between Hamas and the Nazis.
No,
on the
you
record,
changed
Dave.
Well,
You're
no,
on the
Yes,
record.
he's on the
well,
record.
for the record,
That is correct.
you changed
We'll get-
you changed what I said a little bit, but
No,
sure.
no.
Yeah.
Wait. So
No, I didn't say that.
Wait. All right, you don't. So you think morally they are similar? Yes or no?
You said I can't see anything different about them
Yes,
except
and I was
that the
told,
Nazis.
everyone knows
No,
I was
listen.
talking morally. Of
Here's
course,
what's
Hamas does
here's
not
what's
control
beautiful,
the
Mr.
same number
Prager.
of countries.
Mr. Prager, what's beautiful about the internet is what you just said. It is on record, so people can see what
That's
I said,
correct.
and then they
It
can
is
see
all
what
right.
you
That's
said.
demagogic.
That's right.
Go ahead, sir.
There is no moral difference between the Nazis and Hamas. Both want to exterminate Jews. That is what we're talking about, not whether or not the Hamas has taken over Czechoslovakia. That's an irrelevant point to what I made. There is no moral distinction. Hamas would like to butcher every Jew in Israel, maybe in the world, I don't know, but certainly in Israel. It's in their charter, and that's what they announced. They're proud of October 7th. They are proud of rape. They are proud of burning Jewish families. And the Nazis were proud, but the Nazis hid it, and Hamas boasts about it. That's the one difference.
Jake, go ahead.
Again, that's the one difference. See,
Yes.
you make the point again. That's not the one difference. There's other differences also. Go ahead. Go ahead.
This is Alice in Wonderland. It's if anybody watched this debate and they didn't know what was happening in the world, they would think, oh my God, I guess Hamas is this giant power and it's been abusing Israel this entire time. Poor little tiny Israel. And Hamas is this gigantic power crushing Israel. What are you guys talking about? Hamas has got pea shooters. They did terrible damage on October 7th. Now Israel's done 30 times worse to the civilians. They've massacred civilians after civilians after civilians. Israel is Goliath. It is not David. It is.
This again makes absolutely no difference. But how many rockets has Hamas shot at Israel over the last 18 years? Unprovoked. And how many rockets has Israel, the Goliath, shot at Hamas over the last 18 years unprovoked? The answer is, I don't even know the answer. It's tens of thousands of unprovoked rockets on civilians were shot by Hamas, and not one unprovoked rocket was shot by Israel.
Is the Germans in terms of military power. It is not the Jews. The Palestinians are the equivalent of the Jews during the Holocaust. They have been put into ghettos, and they have said, you have no freedom. You will serve us and serve us only. And right now they're saying we're going to have permanent occupation. And so were the Jews not supposed to fight back against the Germans? Do the Palestinians, hold on. Do the Palestinians not have a right to defend themselves? Does it only go one way, where Israel can crush? And how dare you, lowly Palestinians, fight back? How dare you? Now we'll kill 30 times more of you and we'll occupy you forever and ever and ever. And we're supposed to accept that? Are you guys nuts? They're never going to accept it. Never, ever. Batya, I love you, but if you think that the Palestinians are now more anti-Hamas and more pro-Israel, you have lost your mind. They despise Israel, and they will fight. And hold on, this is the most important point. They are going to fight Israel forever, not because they hate the Jews. Oh my God, they're Nazis. Oh, for no reason at all. They were just walking by, and all these Jews came by, and they hate them.
Cenk likes to use a lot of drama in order to get people emotional, to get his point across. And his comparison is 100% morally wrong. The victims here are actually Israel. It has nothing to do with who has more power. It has to do with who is more gentle. The aggressive, you just spend a day in Gaza to find out the culture of how aggressive they are, and then spend a day in Israel to find out how non-aggressive Israel is. Going right back to the missiles I brought out before, Hamas unprovoked has shot tens of thousands of missiles on innocent populations over the last 18 years, and Israel has not shot a single one. That is the reason why Israel is the victim and Hamas is the perpetrator. And if someone can't see that, they are morally corrupt. And these two individuals, in fact, are morally confused and, I suspect as well, corrupt.